That said, our primary purpose is to entertain, and where we can entertain responsibly, obviously we try to do that. We try to have a positive impact on the world. But the first thing we need to do is entertain.
Very few people wanted to see this. Even the little kids who like Disney movies, even they don't seem to be turning up in droves for the movie because the movie is really, really bad.
There was an in-depth piece, like a behind-the-scenes piece, talking about how they've been in a full meltdown about this girl for a couple of years now.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
This is the face of a serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
You know how sometimes a movie just seems destined for greatness, but then, bam, it totally blows up in your face? Well, that's exactly what happened with Disney's live-action Snow White. What was supposed to be a triumph became an all-out spectacle, and not in a good way. When AMC announced that they were pulling the film from theaters, the entire industry was left stunned. Disney, with all its power and resources, couldn't prevent the disaster that had been building for months. And it wasn't just about bad box office numbers. It was about the collapse of everything Disney thought it could rely on. So let's dive in and unravel how this all went wrong. And it went really wrong.
I have a clip of it.
Oh, okay, great.
Her being a retard.
Okay.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That is not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she.
At first, it looked like Disney had all their ducks in a row. They brought in Rachel Ziegler, an up-and-coming star, and Gal Gadot, an established powerhouse, to headline this fresh take on the iconic Snow White story.
It just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic. The movie is really, really bad.
The marketing campaign promised a modern, feminist reimagining of a classic tale where Snow White would no longer just wait for a prince, but chase her own dreams of leadership. It sounded like a cool twist, right? But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. There were whispers, rumors, and growing tensions that would soon spill into the public eye and take down everything in its path. And that's exactly what happened. The first crack appeared on The View, of all places. Rachel Ziegler, who was supposed to be Disney's fresh face of positivity, instead turned into a PR nightmare.
1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
So we didn't do that this time.
Rather than sticking to the safe, rehearsed lines the studio wanted her to say, she went rogue, making off-the-cuff remarks that alienated a lot of people. In fact, her comments about the classic Snow White and her dismissive tone toward those who loved it became the spark that ignited the firestorm.
Particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely when it got
Snow White!
He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
Disney's tightly controlled PR machine was suddenly powerless, and the damage was done. Now, it wasn't just about what Ziegler said, it was the entire aura surrounding the movie. Fans who had been loyal to the original Snow White since 1937 were furious. Not My Snow White became a viral hashtag, and people took to social media in droves to express their anger. They felt like Disney had totally disrespected the source material.
The primary suffering is being sent in by my company to watch a children's movie as a single man, like 2 p.m. on a Thursday. That was the first part that was a little bit weird, but I was basically the only person in the theater.
But Ziegler wasn't backing down. She saw herself as a voice for progress, and maybe that would have worked if the movie had been better, but it wasn't. In fact, the film bombed hard at the box office. So what do you do when you have a massive flop on your hands? For Disney, the answer was clear. More promotion, more interviews, more attempts to salvage the sinking ship. They sent Ziegler on more talk shows, hoping to fix things. But with every new interview, the situation worsened.
And so it was like
Those people.
very much this, yes. It was this
people that
awakening
we need to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
love them in the right direction.
Every time she spoke, the public's resentment grew. The PR team tried to rein her in, but it was like trying to stop a freight train with a handkerchief. The more they tried to control the narrative, the more chaotic it became. And here's where it gets really wild. In an unprecedented move, AMC, the largest theater chain in the country, pulled Snow White from its screens entirely. Imagine that, a major Disney release completely yanked from theaters. That's a huge deal in Hollywood. Normally, a film like this would stay in theaters for weeks, maybe even months. But here we were, only a few weeks after release, and AMC was cutting its losses. It was a sign that Disney had lost control of the film. And the story that was supposed to be Snow White's shining moment was now a cautionary tale for other studios. Now let's talk about the PR disaster. The View meltdown wasn't just a one-off. This turned into a full-scale crisis. The fallout from the live interview wasn't just about Ziegler's comments. It was about how Disney tried to clamp down on the situation. The more they tried to put out fires, the more they spread. Behind the scenes, even producers were calling Ziegler out, leaking their frustration with her outspoken views. One producer's son even posted online about how irresponsible Ziegler was being. So the war wasn't just between the studio and the fans. It was a battle within Disney's own ranks. What had started as a new take on an old story now felt like an assault on something beloved. Critics began pointing out the obvious. The film had become a symbol of what happens when you try to fix something that isn't broken. Or worse, when you turn something nostalgic into a punching bag for political messages. The core fans of Snow White felt like Disney was too focused on pushing an agenda rather than respecting what made the original so special. The film wasn't a reimagining anymore. It was a wrecking ball aimed at their childhood memories. And when AMC made the call to pull the film, the message was clear. Even Disney couldn't save it. So what went wrong? It wasn't just Ziegler's unfiltered comments. The bigger issue was the massive disconnect between the studio's corporate ambitions and the audience's expectations. Disney thought that by reworking Snow White, by updating the story, casting diversely, and pushing forward a progressive message, it could win over the modern moviegoer. But in the process, they forgot the heart of the story that people loved. And Ziegler, well, she wasn't helping matters. It's one thing to modernize a story, but when your star doesn't seem to appreciate the original and actively disrespects it, you're asking for trouble. So what does the Snow White disaster really mean in the grander scheme of things? Well, in many ways, it serves as a cautionary tale for Hollywood studios, especially Disney. The failure of Snow White wasn't just a box office flop, it was a clear signal that even the biggest studios are vulnerable when they lose sight of their core audience and fail to manage the creative and corporate forces at play. The cultural impact, Hollywood's reckoning with nostalgia. The most significant lesson from Snow White is that audiences are no longer content to simply accept a fresh take on an old story without questioning the intent behind it. Nostalgia is a double-edged sword. While it can drive immense success, as we saw with The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, it can also backfire if the remake is seen as disrespectful to the original. Disney's Snow White didn't just suffer from poor box office numbers, it became a cultural flashpoint for broader debates about political correctness, representation, and corporate interference in art. We're at a point in the entertainment world where audiences are more vocal, more engaged, and less willing to accept half-hearted attempts at modernization. It's no longer enough to simply update a classic. Studios have to prove they respect the original material too. If they don't, the backlash will be swift and unforgiving. Disney learned this lesson the hard way with Snow White, and they'll likely be much more cautious about future remakes. The future of Disney's live-action remakes. So where does this leave Disney? Well, they've already made it clear that they're not done with live-action adaptations of their classics, but expect a shift in their approach. Going forward, we'll likely see studios investing more time in understanding the core themes and emotional beats of the original films before attempting to update them. There may be fewer drastic changes, and more effort will likely be made to strike a balance between creativity and respecting fan expectations. It's also possible that Disney will take a more hands-on approach with their stars, ensuring that their public personas align more closely with the image they want to project. But Snow White's failure isn't just about Disney's future. It's a bigger moment in Hollywood history. It signals a shift in how studios handle nostalgia, reboots, and talent. Gone are the days when studios can throw a famous name and a big budget behind a project and hope it will succeed. Audiences demand more than that now. They want respect for the originals, they want authentic updates, and they expect stars to be in tune with the narrative. a lesson in public relations, the Snow White meltdown will forever be remembered as a textbook case of how not to handle press tours and public relations. The situation revealed how fragile a project can be when the messaging falls apart. In a world dominated by social media and live-streamed interviews, the slightest misstep can snowball into a full-blown crisis. Disney, in trying to control the narrative, only amplified the problem. If there's one thing the Snow White debacle teaches us, it's that authenticity matters. If a star or a film doesn't come across as genuine, if it's perceived as manufactured or out of touch, it can quickly turn from a hopeful success to a total disaster. The end of an era? The Snow White meltdown marks the end of an era where Disney could do no wrong. It's a sobering reminder that even the mightiest studios can crumble under the weight of controversy and poor execution. It's also a sign that the public is more engaged, more informed, and more skeptical than ever before. For Disney, the road ahead will require more care, more sensitivity, and a lot more listening to their audience. Snow White might have died at the box office, but the lessons it taught the industry will live on for a long time.